Hello and welcome to Civic Spaces, the podcast from the European Civic Forum, where we sit down with those fighting for systemic change in Europe and beyond. Today, in the second episode of our series about the upcoming European elections, we focus on alternative forms of participation and the power of volunteering. For today's episode, we sat down with Piotr Sadowski from Volonteurope, a network aiming to achieve more social justice throughout Europe through active citizenship and volunteering.
So, welcome to this special episode of Civic Spaces, brought to you from Marseille in the wonderful studio of Radio Galère. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by my colleague Iñaki and by Piotr Sadowski from Volonteurope. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So, Piotr, maybe to get started, you could tell us a little bit about your organization, Volonteurope.
Sure. Yes. So Volonteurope is just like European Civic Forum. We're a network of national organizations that are engaged in social action, volunteering, and promotion of active citizenship. Various routes to achieve more social justice across Europe, and not just in the European Union, but in the wider Europe, because we've also got a status in the INGO conference of the Council of Europe. So we're actually got members as well in other countries, and we're very active in promoting access to socio-economic rights and fundamental rights. And I believe that participation is one of those fundamental rights that everybody should have and should be able to exercise. So that's what we do. We've been around for over 40 years. Traveled from being established in the Netherlands, going to the UK, and then through Brexit having to leave the shores of the small island, and we're now proudly operating out of Belgium for about 5 years now.
Great,
amazing. And we wanted to continue to ask you how you feel participation is a form of democratic. Volunteering as a form of democratic participation. What's your experience in that, and talking a bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, volunteering is for a long time I've been saying, maybe it's become a little bit of a cliche if people listen to me too often, but I think I think volunteering is probably one of the most visible ways to express active citizenship, because really it is a true and pure volunteering is a gift of your time. It's a gift of your heart. It's a gift of your mind. It's an expression, most often an expression of solidarity with another person. That other person does not necessarily have to be finding themselves in a vulnerable situation. It's often the case that this happens. I mean, we've had major examples of this happening, for example, with the Russian invasion in Ukraine, what's been happening on the borders of Poland and Ukraine initially after the invasion, where it was actually individual citizens, CSOs, taking an action when the Polish government really was completely inactive for a long time. So that was that gift of solidarity. But I think it can happen at a much smaller scale as well. Sorry, I do flap my hands around a lot, so I might sit on them when I'm speaking. So I think it's an extremely important element of enabling people to really play a role in their communities. And I think, whether it happens on a very sporadic basis or even, say, once a year when people come together and volunteer because of a day of 5th of this, around December, the 5th of December being the International Day of Volunteers, or whether it's part of a bigger campaign, whether it's taking part in a 5K park run to raise funding for cancer research. The examples are limitless and endless, but it's all, I think, linked to the fact that you cannot be forced to volunteer. That's one thing for sure. You need to give it from your heart and from your own conviction.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's actually something that I wanted to ask you about. Like, how do you mobilize people to get involved? Because of course, to give away their time for free, of course they gain something from it as well. But at a time when participation more generally can be very difficult, and people have busy and stressful lives, and maybe people also don't have a lot of faith that things can change. How do you? I imagine in your role you do a lot of mobilizing people and animating people, and how do you do that?
I think because we're a network at European level, so for us it's more about taking those sort of good practice examples from our members at national levels, regional level, on how they actually are able to facilitate an enabling infrastructure for volunteering, for volunteers, for active citizens to get engaged, to have this chance to participate in whatever form in their communities. So we take those good practices and we translate them into advocacy at European level. So we're perhaps not as much as the volunteer makers as such, although we do engage in European projects. We have particularly one on the go right now, which is a Horizon project that looks at the young people's engagement as people who are aware and conscious of the fact how scarce water is as a resource. And the project is called Flow, Future Lives with Oceans and Water. And it is really about creating bases of stewardship amongst young people across Europe to really be the leaders of looking after our water resources. And I think when you there's a lot of, if you look at young people's mobilization and awareness of the climate change that is happening, for a long time we were only thinking really, or predominantly, especially around policies at European level around the green transition and the climate change, looking at the green agenda. But I think looking very much at the blue agenda is also extremely important. We've had big changes that happen positively that, United Nations, for example, recognized access to water as a human right. But it's not always the case. And water is actually becoming a scarce resource. And we're not talking even, far away from Europe. We're talking about European countries. I know you come from Spain as well. I also happen to live in Spain. And the issue of water scarcity is an increasing problem. Even in my country of origin, in Poland as well, this is also starting to happen now. Right. So I think this is a project where we're looking at really, really the entire macro continent of Europe and trying to mobilize young people through a series of foresight and futures workshops, which are based on certain macro regions, such as the Mediterranean, Bay of Biscay, Arctic Ocean, the North Sea, and finally we will go and focus on the Black Sea as well, and create this community of young people who are volunteers, who are active citizens, who are concerned human beings, who want to work together across the countries to create a bit more hope for what comes next, right? So that this resource, which is water, which we all need, which is scarce, that it becomes something that can be enjoyed by future generations as well. So that's one example where we sort of are the volunteer makers, yes. But I would not want to say that we're as Volonteurope, I think our members are the key drivers of those volunteering opportunities. And then you mentioned something about people having less time. Of course, it's very true. And this is, I think, a big challenge for volunteer involving organizations, is how do you reach and how do you enable people who are perhaps finding themselves in situations where really their time availability is such that, and their own socioeconomic situation is such that they cannot afford to give up time for volunteering, because really what their preoccupation is about surviving, having enough resources, cash, to basically pay for food and bills. And especially in the rising costs of living situations, that this becomes a predominant occupation. So so there is also something that we've been really trying to see how we can make volunteering more engaging, but also more inclusive, beyond the middle classes masses that can afford to volunteer. And I guess this has been translated as well into our ambitions to improve programs such as, for example, the European Solidarity Corps as well, to make sure that it does provide enough resources to enable young people coming from perhaps more challenging backgrounds to also be able to benefit from the cross-border mobility, because we all know, all three of us, actually, we come from different countries. We don't live in our home countries necessarily. We travel a lot, so we very often take it for granted. But there's masses of, let's say, young people or other people of other ages as well, for whom this is just impossible to access, right?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, what do you think can be done? Like, what? I guess we're talking about the EU here. Like, what do they need to do to make this more possible and volunteering more accessible? Because it's true, if volunteering is only accessible to those with means, then it's a serious problem, right?
Yeah. So you both are too young to remember this, but 2011 was the European Year of Volunteering. And back then, I was very much engaged with some of my colleagues from other European networks. We started, I think, in 2008 to lobby the European Commission and Parliament to designate that year as the European Year of Volunteering, because it does make a difference. If there's a European year, really there's a big focus and spotlight. But back then, and as a result of the year, we produced this comprehensive policy agenda for volunteering in Europe. One of those was to really get it through some really thick skulls that volunteering is it's a gift of free time, but it's not cost free. Yeah. So it does need to be resourced properly, managed properly. It also needs to ensure that if you engage young people of older ages, vulnerable people, that there are things such as safeguarding policies in place. Volunteering, of course, there could be some sort of informal ways for people to volunteer, but generally speaking, if you do it as an organized activity, there's an infrastructure that needs to be built around it. It doesn't just happen because it's, it doesn't happen for nothing.
Sure.
So as a result, at the end of 2011, we've said, look, especially to policymakers, but to funders as well, to understand that volunteering is not cost-free. And it really amazes me that still, 13 years later, we're still finding ourselves at moments where sometimes people say, yeah, but volunteering, it's free, isn't it? And yeah, it's not. So there's that, I think, constant battle. I mean, things have progressed hugely since then, especially in Central Eastern Europe, which used to, where volunteering was a sort of a dirty word almost, with the memories of communism as well.
Forced volunteering.
Exactly, forced volunteering. So as a result of the European Year of Volunteering back then, those countries introduced, for example, laws on volunteering, which really formalize, but in a positive sense, the relationship between the organization that involves a volunteer and the volunteer as well. So, for example, making sure that volunteers are well looked after, there's safeguarding in place, that they're not out of pocket, all these things which come to creating an amazing experience for a volunteer. Because I would say that if somebody's interested in volunteering and comes along and puts all their sort of belief, hope and effort into that one experience, and if it's crap, then that person is very unlikely to come back and be a sort of a multiplier, a potential multiplier of the experience of participation in their own communities.
I was going to say as well, because you mentioned the resources and kind of capacity that's needed for volunteering, not only to be a positive experience for volunteers, but also to be impactful. And kind of drawing on that, how would you describe, the training and the kind of education behind volunteering and training volunteers for their work to be effective, for their work to be positive, for their engagement with the communities that they might be volunteering with to be positive, and take into account that maybe their formal education didn't include some of these subjects? And I was wondering what your experience has been with this.
So I think the positive experience has been that, for example, there are actually now opportunities for you if you want to go into the voluntary sector or become specialize in volunteer management. You can actually follow a university degree in third sector volunteer management. There are institutes for excellence which deal with the sort of teaching you the good practices of volunteer management, of building up volunteering programs, interacting, liaising with policymakers, but also with the funders. So I think a lot has happened, and there's way more opportunities to actually create a more sort of formal path towards becoming trained, educated, graduating from specific courses like that. So I think this is also a very good opportunity for this to happen. I guess the other option is, when we've just finished our General Assembly. Today we had more discussions about the upcoming EU elections, but also what happens in next year for European Civic Forum and for its members. Just look at that, how much learning happens between the different people who are in the room. So I think the same happens for people who are practitioners in the active citizenship, volunteering, social action sector. It's that ability for them to come together and exchange their good practices. So I think that mobility, not just of volunteers, is important, but also those who are in charge of making volunteering happen. And certainly there should be, I believe, the programs where these funding programs where these exchanges can be happening are super important as well.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the European elections there.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously a time to really mobilize people, but it's also, I guess, we can also reflect on the fact that getting people excited about the EU or the European Parliament elections is maybe not super easy.
Mm-hmm.
Let alone getting people to participate in campaigns. I wondered, do you have any experience in that coming up to the elections, or are you, as a network or some of your members, getting involved in kind of helping to mobilize people around the elections?
I think there are definitely examples of this, the fact that we have, through our membership as well, but through also our partnerships with other networks, or where we as Volonteurope are members, such as within the European Civic Forum. I would probably build my answer on the example of the shrinking civic space and the sort of violations of the rule of law and democratic provisions that we should be enjoying as people living in the European Union or in different states of member states of the European Union. And in those countries, those member states where there has been a shrinking civic space, actually volunteers, active citizens, people who are organized through civil society organizations have experienced it for themselves as well. The fact that the organization, which is facilitating their ability to participate and be active members of their communities, has also been harassed, closed down, affected, funding being cut as well. So they are actually have had the first-hand experience of where that oppression can lead in terms of stopping them from having the opportunities to do something for let's put it this way, not do something for others, but do something with others, right? Yeah. Because it's also about decolonizing the idea of volunteering, that we go in as, these sort of do-gooders to a population of people who need help, right? So that's also something that still needs to happen. I forgot to mention that, but anyway, moving on from that, I think these sorts of groups of people who have experienced the fact that those opportunities are shrinking because of the fact that the civil society organizations with which they're engaged are also being harassed and oppressed. This, I think, really mobilizes them to think about how important it is for them to participate in European Parliament elections, because I think these ones that we're approaching now are probably those elections which will matter the most for not just for the next mandate of 5 years, but really on how the European social model will be looking like after June this year and going forward as well. Because I mean, there's various predictions that maybe even up to a quarter of the European Parliament will be made up of the types of MEPs who are not really interested in us as civil society, who are not really interested in having citizens or people who act as watchdogs of and stand up for being oppressed. I mean, for them, we're a nuisance, right? So so there's that challenge, and I would say that this is a challenge because I want to avoid using the word that there is a danger, because a danger lurks everywhere, and sometimes if a danger lurks, we can do nothing about it. It will happen to us. I would much rather call it a challenge, because we can rise up to challenges and really do something about them as well. And if we give in to using that sort of defeatist language that I fear about what's going to happen, I think this is something that those far right movements or ultra right movements are loving when they're hearing it. That they are managing to instill that language of others feeling scared and terrified even before the elections have happened. So I also add a little bit of let's say optimism, and also being up for this challenge. And I think I'll finish by saying that as civil society, I think we're never too scared of hoping and aiming for the highest elements of our visions and missions that we write into our work, into our policies, into our programs.
I totally agree with that. So this challenge that you speak of, and I think I agree, it's a challenge, it's not a danger, because for everything that you just said there. How do you think we should rise up to this challenge? I mean, in the scenario that we end up seeing a European Parliament that is got a really huge contingent of extreme right MEPs, how should we as civil society more broadly rise up to that challenge? Do we need to change the way that we've been approaching things so far? Do we need different tactics? And how do we how do we keep this kind of hopeful spirit amidst this challenge? Yeah.
So on the one hand, yes, it's likely that there will be this, let's say, a quarter of the parliament, which will look a bit dodgy after the 9th of June. But I think then there's an important role that the progressive political parties, which will get their seats and remain in power as well, because even if you don't hold the majority, you're still in a position of power, and that's the beauty of the European Parliament as well, that various progressive parties can actually work together to defend European values and our values as Europeans, as human beings, who perhaps not just those who are who have a European passport, but those who actually made Europe their home. But I think what we really need to, if you're asking me, do we need to do something different? Perhaps just be more demanding of those progressive parties to really give us, to really understand that we are at the forefront of mobilizing and understanding the lived experiences of people on the ground. And if they treat us as equal partners for that consultation and for being able to feed examples and experiences of what it is that, let's say, policies at European level, which trickle down to national level, how they affect an everyday person. If we're really given that seat of negotiation, being listened to, and not just a piecemeal sort of approach to dialoguing with us, I think this is a recipe for standing up to those who will undoubtedly be in the parliament after the elections, and will be doing their best to try to dismantle the amazing work that we have been doing to progress socio-economic fundamental rights in Europe.
Well, you heard it from him, so that's a message to those MEPs and candidates from the more progressive parties, that you need to read the Civil Society for EU manifesto and sign our pledge.
Absolutely.
Maybe just to finish with Piotr, imagine that you're speaking to someone who's never volunteered before in their life. What would you say to them to encourage them?
Probably the thing that I would say is just have a go at it and really try and just, I don't know, be brave or be open-minded and see how it is. And especially if you come from with a sort of perhaps a little bit of a, I don't know, not necessarily a fear, but a bit of anxiety of the fact that you might not be able to, I don't know, to help. I think the idea is not to think that you're going there to necessarily help, but it's more to establish a bond with another person. And this is the reason why I said to volunteer with someone and not volunteer for someone. Of course, there are many examples of volunteering where the person who is the beneficiary is really at a very much a receiving end of the good things that are being done. But very often as well, it's about doing things with other people as well. So get rid of that fear, that anxiety, and really just realize that you can achieve so much, I don't know, positivity and a sense of personal achievement, but also really, really chill out as a result of volunteering. And I really believe that it is good for your well-being, for your mental health as well. Sometimes to also cut yourself away from the day-to-day job that you're doing, and also learn about different perspectives on other people's experiences. That would be my suggestion.
Sounds like a really great suggestion. I'm convinced.
Thank you very much.
So am I.
Thank you very much, Piotr, for joining us.
Super. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you
so much. You've been listening to Civic Spaces from the European Civic Forum. This episode was produced and hosted by Ben Goodwin and I, Iñaki Rezaula. Many thanks to Piotr Sadowski for taking the time to talk to us, and Sidi Darilo from Radio Galer for helping us produce this episode. See you next time.